Pilot Say What?
What?
Exactly. Welcome to another episode of Pilot Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say. The idea here is to get a little more perspective out of someone who's been on their journey as a pilot now, and we have Cayman with us. If you guys are joining in from a previous episode, thank you for joining in once more. My name is Zach, and I am once again your host. Today we'll talk. We'll talk about a lot of different things, but I just want to go ahead and let Cayman. I say it right, Cayman, right?
Cayman, correct,
Okay,
yeah.
I'll let Cayman introduce himself and kind of just give us a heads up.
Okay, I'm Cayman Dole, been a
Mhm.
flight instructor here at Thrust Flight for just over 2 years. I started the ZTA program back in August of 2021. Yeah, got hired just a little over a year after that. Started working here at Thrust in November of 2022.
Okay, and then but before you came to join us at Thrust, were you doing anything particularly? Did you have any other routes you were considering?
Yeah, so I was kind of, I was pretty young. I had just turned 21 at that point.
Hmm.
Got out of school, tried college, was working full time, and tried college, but wasn't really, it's a little saturating.
Yeah.
So I dropped out of school and I was bartending for a couple of years, and then I was like, okay, I'm kind of getting to this point where uh, I don't want to be stuck into this. And you see a lot of people who just can't make it out of that industry. Life starts to happen,
Yeah.
and I decided to kind of jump on it before I put myself in a situation where I don't want to say couldn't get out of it, but it would just been really challenging too.
Understood. Yeah, that makes sense. Likewise, I tend to want to move around if I feel like, oh, there's something new going on. But especially in a situation where, like, I was working retail, I was just telling you before we started,
Mm.
I was like, okay, kind of ready to go ahead and push whatever I'm doing to the next level. So kind of ended here in a similar way, but in a very different for a different reason, because you're flying planes.
Just,
So
I mean, a little bit different. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing too, man. I can tell that.
I don't know. I can't imagine, I mean, I can now kind of imagine flying a plane, but not before I got here. So that's what makes me wonder. What made you think of flying planes? Before you got here, how did you kind of land on the idea of entering into aviation?
So my dad's father was in the Air Force, so I
Hmm.
guess he grew up on the U.S. Air Force Academy
Yeah.
over up in Colorado. So I kind of wanted to go that route. Once I got a little bit older, started talking to the couple of the different branches of the military,
Hmm.
and they kind of deterred me. Kind of were just like, well, it's
Yeah.
it's not. I don't want to say like it's not as easy as you think, but they were just kind of putting up barriers.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, maybe not that. After a couple of years, like I said, I was working in a restaurant. Um,
Hmm.
and then at one point, I started getting ads for ATP actually. It was like,
Mm.
oh, okay, so this is something I hadn't thought about, the kind of traditional flight school route.
Hmm.
Just seemed like the only way to get into aviation was through the military. So once I started doing some research into that, it was like, okay, doing my research, found Thrust Flight, and
Yeah.
joined over just, a couple months after that.
Yeah. I've heard people say that they didn't realize how accessible flying a plane is,
Mm.
or learning how to fly a plane, or aviation in general. But you saw that you maybe an ad or something like that. You started a Google search. Did you come take a tour or anything like that?
So I actually didn't.
Okay.
I kind of just hopped into it, which
Okay.
which I learned from that in itself.
Yeah.
I don't regret it by any means. I
Absolutely.
love what I do. I love flying. But I think I could have probably done a little bit better research and stuff before just kind of hopping into it.
It's funny you
Mm.
say that. I think I sometimes I think that the only way to get started is to just jump into things. We had Jessica on here recently. She did the same thing. She had never like flown a plane. She never took a discovery flight. I don't know if you did that or not.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
No Discovery Flight either.
Okay, well, she just, submitted an application, and then her first time here was like when it was the first day she was supposed to get here. I mean, is that similar? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much exactly. The first time
Wow.
I saw a small plane in person, or I didn't notice them flying around like I do now,
Yeah.
obviously. But the first time I saw like a Cessna 172
Yeah.
was at that Thrust, like my first day of ZTA.
That's wild. Were you at all nervous that you maybe just wouldn't even like being up there in the sky like that?
I wasn't worried about being afraid of the sky. I remember initially joining the program, feeling extremely overwhelmed. Like those first couple days, they're like, "Oh, this is what this is going to take. You're going
Hmm.
to be, doing this, doing that," and that
Yeah.
made me a little nervous. Definitely, I was like, "Oh God,
So it
what am
got a
I?"
little overwhelming real quick, but
Yeah, and it was. I think it was just more the thought. It was like, what I didn't really know what I was getting into, and now I'm
Mhm.
in it. It's like there's not really any turning back, kind of thing.
Yeah, you kind of already committed.
Exactly,
I'm sure.
exactly.
But you made that decision. Was like what all went into that decision though? Was there anything else? Like, did you need to you like figure out what you're gonna do for work and things like that? Like, how did those kind of decisions or conversations go?
So that was kind of, talking with family. I mean, I don't have anybody in aviation, but
Mm,
my family was very invested in trying to help me
mm,
succeed.
mhm,
So they were doing a little bit of research. I was doing my research, and it just seemed that the, like it's kind of a rite of passage. It seems for people who come in,
mm.
like general aviation. You start at a flight school, and then you become a flight instructor, and then kind of wherever you want to go from there. I've always kind of had my eyes set on the airline. So
What about the first time you actually flew though? Was there like, what was that like?
well, I remember there was trepidation for sure. I was a little nervous,
Yeah.
and I remember asking my instructor, I was like, "Hey man, like I'm pretty nervous. I've never done this before.
Mhm.
Never been in a small plane."
Mhm.
Um, and he's just like, I think that feeling will be you'll probably feel that these first couple days. But he's like, once you can kind of get through this initial point of just the like basically the fear of the unknown. He goes,
Yeah.
it'll start to feel a lot more natural when you can
Yeah.
actually when you're able to kind of take control of the airplane yourself. Then you
Mhm.
won't even think about it anymore, and that was true. And I've told that to countless students in the
Yeah.
past.
And then did when you first went up, did you? I mean, it seems like from what I hear from people, the first time you go up, they're gonna give you some sort of control over the plane.
Yeah, and I mean, so the thrust we start out in the simulator. So I mean, I probably did
Mm,
somewhere between 6 and 10 hours of simulator.
at very least,
Um,
yeah.
so we started out there. So getting into the plane, it wasn't like it was completely unknown at this point, but I was still just very unsure about actually being in a small airplane in the sky.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was wondering. When I first got here, I got taken up in one of the Cessnas. I was like, "This is pretty cool,"
Mhm.
but it was definitely my first time as well. But it was kind of relaxing once you get up there and you kind of like, I don't know. It feels like you have a lot of control
Yeah.
actually. But I guess that's what you're going to school for, is learn how to use that control for over the plane. Okay, so you get through your ratings. I think one thing I want to highlight, especially if someone's listening, maybe like people are thinking about joining aviation or they don't even know like what it looks like. I'm curious if you can kind of state what it's like to start as a student and get to where you're at now. I mean, what are some of the like the steps that it takes? What is the day to day like? What does it kind of look like to get to where you're at now?
Yeah. So in a structured program like we have at Thrust,
Mm-hmm.
there's we have written tests for every rating that you're going to do,
Mm,
and getting those knocked out, I think initially is going to be one of the biggest things. If you get all
yeah.
of those knocked out, the people I've seen get through our program the fastest had all of their writtens done before they finished even had their private pilot's license.
Yeah.
It's the dedication from there. So starting there, you get all of the kind of essentially homework out of the way, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can really buckle down and do your ground school with an instructor and a lot of self study with other students.
Yeah.
And I mean, it should be daily at that point. At minimum 5 days a week. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
needs some breaks and stuff. But
And we're like our students are pretty much. I mean, they're full time students.
mm,
So that's just kind of the way the system works here at Thrustlight. So I mean, 5 hours ish a week probably doesn't sound too crazy. If someone's like worried about not being a good studier or something like that, do you relate to that at all?
yeah, so I was, in high school, I wasn't always the guy bringing in the A+ homework.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. So that was a little bit of a different
Hmm.
kind of different case for me. But getting into this, once you actually start to see the material
Mm.
and get to fly the airplane, it's like, okay, now I'm actually getting to do something. I have to know this to be able to succeed in the airplane. Um, and it's very apparent if you're not doing that ground stuff. Yeah, I've seen people who can fly the plane, but they're not going to get to this point because they won't do their ground study. You miss
Mm.
elements like weather and stuff, and the weather is going to be one of the biggest parts that come into play with us flying. And I mean, there's a lot of information that you need to learn before you can safely fly the airplane.
I remember some of the students were telling me about the weather and how much they've learned about weather since they've been here. Because I didn't know that was really so much of the training. I thought maybe it was like, I mean, it makes sense, but I just didn't understand that you were going to learn so much about weather either.
Yeah.
Uh, but you were saying like, I guess one thing I want to ask then is what's different from this than when you were going to college? Because you're like, maybe that's not like the route I want to figure it out through, right? Uh, could you kind of say what makes this different for you?
The enjoyability of
Uh-huh.
one side of it, because it's exciting.
Yeah.
Um, the information, that's one thing that kind of kept me driven
Mhm.
is, I'm learning this stuff so I can be better at flying the airplane. That was
Mm.
that was really big for me. And I mean, not it's some of it's interesting. I'm happy how much more I know about weather and stuff. It's like it kind of gives me something. It's like, oh, look at those clouds, or you see something before I would never even have thought of, and now I
Yeah.
could like explain it to somebody, which is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. So just to be sure, you're saying that really the fact that it's so applicable, immediately applicable, like that
Exactly.
probably makes a big difference for you. I know for me, I'm kind of that way. Like I need a more immediate motivation sometimes. Uh, but yeah, and I think there's people who probably relate a lot to that because we have a lot of people who
Oh
eventually
yeah.
come here after either after going to school or maybe instead of school, or people who change their careers from jobs that maybe feel a little bit more like school as well. And it's not that people weren't always a bad student; it's just what kind of student people want to be. It seems like.
Mm.
Would you say you're a good student like now? Do you feel like
Oh,
you had to shake
absolutely.
off some of those habits? Was it hard?
Yeah,
Yeah.
initially, and I will say it was more of a kind of self-studier,
Hmm.
and I wish I would have been able to study more with others,
Yeah.
kind of initially coming through, but my study habits have changed immensely. I
Yeah.
mean, going through high school, I'd get the textbook and, just actually, like, look for the answer, look at the questions first, and then, try to find the answer, but going through the program here,
Hmm.
I was actually reading the entire chapter, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd read the whole thing and, like, make notes and highlight stuff and then
Mm-hmm.
actually try to answer the questions,
Yeah.
go back if I couldn't remember everything because
Yeah.
textbook reading isn't the most interesting, but
Exactly, but taking notes helps, right?
Mhm.
And then do you study here or do you kinda study at home?
Yeah, I study at home. I mean, I did primarily then. I mean, now most of my
Oh,
study is gonna kinda come with, students, students will ask me questions, and it's like, I'm not too sure about that, or maybe I kind of second guess myself, so we'll go through some of those things together.
yeah.
Um, I mean, every so often, I'll kinda just look at some of our like, the aviation weather handbook, is a big one that I'll just kinda start reading.
Mhm.
It's like, "Oh, I'm not doing anything. This is something I can look at." Um, primarily, I do that at home at
Yeah.
this point, but, I think the group study is kind of going to be the best way to go through it. I wish I would have done more of it
Mm.
when I was going through.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about the group study. And maybe I don't know which way I would benefit the most myself. But I'm more of a like I like to be around people and get going that kind of way. But now as a CFI, I mean your interaction with the school is a lot different. Uh, how long have you been? Did you say you've been a CFI now?
Just over 2 years.
Just over 2 years. Gotcha. Uh, what was that start like getting into being a CFI? Because you were a student here and then you were a CFI here, right?
Yeah, it was actually very, very seamless for me. It just kind of felt like now I was just the one in the other seat of the airplane. I
Mm.
was already comfortable with all of the instructors, or at least most of them. So at one point, it's now they're I guess it's more of like kind of a friendly relationship, and it's like,
Hmm.
okay, we've all I talk to them and we'd be friendly and stuff, but it's like, hey, now it's almost kind of like a
Like almost like a peer, right?
exactly like a peer.
Yeah.
That's kind of the transition.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine the difference there then. What I mean, was there a lot to learn still at that point?
Oh, absolutely, and I learn all the time still.
Yeah.
The learning doesn't stop in aviation.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
but the transition wasn't bad, but I mean, learning how to flight instruct in those first couple were, definitely interesting. I remember being super, super nervous my first couple of lessons. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, this is what I've planned that we're gonna do, but is it gonna actually play out this way? Are we
Mhm.
gonna do this,
Mhm.
whatever,
Yeah.
could happen over the course of our 2-hour flight.
I guess if you were to and maybe it's hard to narrow this down, so maybe I'll word it like this. Uh if you were talking to yourself when you first started being a flight instructor, when you first started as a CFI, of course there's some things you've learned since then,
Mm.
right? That make you better at being a CFI. If you were to be able to kind of like talk to yourself then and say, "Hey, one thing I think you could know now would be this, this, and that," what would you say to yourself?
I think initially I would have tried to keep myself more kind of like locked in to say on the studying because
Mm-hmm.
I kind of it was like I just finished the this race. So when I first finished flight instructing, it was like, okay, now I don't need to um, hit the books every night or whatever
Right.
it may be, and I think that was a little bit of what could have it was a bit of a challenge for me initially.
Mm.
Once I realized it's like, okay, there's still so much that I have to learn. I can't just stop this at that point. So it took me a couple weeks where I was just kind of like trying to tone it down. But I mean, finding a healthy combination of the two. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't study every day, but
Right.
I still will get in there and kind of hit the books, for so to say. So that
Yeah.
I think that probably was one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
Um,
Remembering to remain a student kind of is what it sounds like to me. And
exactly.
not that you were like, "Oh, I'm done learning," because you even said a moment ago, like, "There's always more to learn." But to stay a student, um, that makes sense. You know what I mean?
I mean, it helped me realize we're still, everybody here at Thrust is so early in the aviation journey,
Hmm.
and that's what
Yeah.
I tell students that all the time. It's we're not much different. I only started flying 3 years ago, just because I'm close to 2,000 flight hours, and these students have all 100 hours.
Yeah.
very well they could still be my boss at some point. So it didn't necessarily feel like I was still a student, but it helped me realize that this is just the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, okay, gotcha. That's good. You're still okay. That makes sense. You remember to be ambitious in that way too.
Mm.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess I asked that to say, I've had a couple CFIs on here that were like brand new still, and there's still always going to be CFIs that are new,
Mm.
straight out of training and getting maybe their commercial rating. So maybe that's something good for them to hear. Hey, like, you're still new too. You're just learning with other people. You're just leading some of those lessons. Um, so now that you've been here for a little while, um, what's your do you have like a certain plan or a certain direction that you're aiming for?
Yeah, so I'm actually a cadet instructor for one of the school's partnered regional airlines.
Okay.
So I'm really just waiting. I've already got all of my minimums met.
Nice.
Hiring has been kind of slow these last couple months.
Hmm.
It's starting to pick back up finally, so I'm hoping I've got a job here in the next 2 or 3 months. Moving over there. I mean, I've already got a conditional job lined up.
Okay.
So now it's just basically waiting for them to give me a call.
So I want to know a little bit more about. Did it take you a while to get signed up with the cadet program first and foremost?
It's available as soon as you start teaching at one of the
Okay.
partner schools. So example thrust, we're
Yeah.
we're partnered with this regional airline. So immediately that's kind of what pushed me to get it done. Is there were people getting hired after me that were already becoming cadets, and I was like, oh man, I need to get on this.
Yeah, you feel like a little behind almost immediately, right? Like, oh, what am I doing? I'm sleeping on this opportunity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I mean, I only had about 400 flight hours, but it was I tried to give myself a little bit of time because I mean I didn't feel immediately ready as when I first started flight instructing.
Hmm.
I knew that as I continued, my knowledge would increase. So I kind of gave myself, I think it took me 4 months after I started working here
Hmm.
to actually apply. And I mean, it went well. I got the job. So
Yeah, right. That's really awesome. So what that does, I would like if possible, if you could maybe explain a little bit about what a cadet program is for someone who it may be an opportunity for soon.
yeah, so
Yeah.
there's different levels of these cadet programs. So
Mhm.
some actually you can sign a conditional job offer, or others you become a cadet as a when you're a student, and then you're guaranteed an interview later along the lines. And there's other benefits you get, like merchandise and mentorship
Mhm.
going through. But the one that I chose to move with,
Mhm.
it was just kind of a basically get my foot in the door before I'm even ready.
Okay.
That was the biggest thing for me is I wanted to secure a job before I was even ready for the job,
Mhm.
essentially.
Mhm. And so it gives you a lot more of an opportunity. You still have to interview with them though, right?
I've already done the
Oh,
interview,
you
so I'm
have done the interview. So now it's just more of like a seniority number sort of thing, right?
correct. Yeah, and so it used to be a little bit different. They used to have multiple different aircraft, but now they've got one aircraft. So I'm not even sure what that seniority number is doing for me, but
Yeah.
at least I've got the job ready.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And you're in there. You got, like you said, a foot in the door kind of thing. So when it comes time, the transition should be pretty smooth. What other benefits have you kind of like taken advantage of, if you have?
I haven't actually used them. I know a lot of other of the cadet instructors at Thrust do have,
Hmm.
but we get health benefits
Mm.
through like major airlines and stuff like that. Full travel benefits. So my dad actually he uses. I get 20% off on flights.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
yeah, for like guaranteed tickets, he can fly standby for free. He and I could both fly standby for
Yeah.
free, but he's been really utilizing that 20% off to guarantee a flight spot.
Was he flying a lot before that, or was he just like, oh, I got 20% off now, I'm gonna take advantage?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And we tried to get the standby one day for him, but it didn't work out too well. So he's like, I'll just spend the money on the ticket.
Now, I had a friend that had me on their standby tickets for a while, and I they put me on right before quarantine time. And I had taken one flight, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm about to do this. And even though it was standby, I was like, I'll travel light. I mean, I'll figure it out.
Mm.
And I had taken 2 trips like back to back each weekend, and I was just gonna keep doing it. And I was like, man, I'm gonna have so much fun. And then of course, things don't go that way. Quarantine kind of happened. But afterwards, I didn't use it very often, except a few times. But of course, it was all through standby, and I felt like the seats were filling up a lot more than they used to, and so standby was even more difficult than I remembered it being. But I mean, when I was just a solo traveler, I'll go, I'll fly here, and then I'll fly there. I mean, I'll wait, whatever. I'll sit at the airport all day if I have to, if I'm just trying to kind of do a casual little trip. But I can't imagine doing that very much anymore, to be
Well,
honest
it's
with
and so
you.
the way that I kind of think about it, or what I've talked to other people, and they've said, don't buy the ticket until, or don't buy your like hotel room until the plane is getting ready to take off.
Hmm.
It's like you never know what could happen.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
see,
been kind of the block for me there. It's like, maybe if I knew I wanted to get out, but I didn't really care where,
mhm.
then I think I would probably use that standby ticket just because, why not? I'm going on an adventure, right?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to go. So one, I did. I wanted to go to Florida, and I knew I wanted to be there for an event. But I was like, I gave myself like an extra day worth of traveling because I knew as long as I went to the event, I'd be content. I was like, whatever. I don't have that much pressure on the whole situation, and I didn't book anything ahead of time really. And I did what you said, and I told my girlfriend, well, if you want to go, it's gonna be a lot more expensive. I mean, do you want to? How much do you want to spend? Because I'm like, I don't. I'm only going because it's free.
Yeah, it's
so
too.
but that being said, I was like, I don't think you want to do standby. So if you don't want to do standby or worry about whether or not I'm gonna make it, then I mean, I'm gonna do this both. So, and that's probably the biggest difference now. I'll book a last minute flight. I'll do a last minute, car rental or whatever. But my girlfriend doesn't like it last
Yeah.
minute. So, so do you sort of expect that you said the hiring's picking up a little bit more
Mm.
now? Do you kind of what gives you the signs that it's gonna be picking up a little bit more?
Well, I've been talking to people.
Uh-huh.
So I was actually a lot of the old instructors at Thrust. They were all cadet instructors like
Yeah.
myself, and three of them just within the last no, four of them actually within the
Whoa.
last 2 months have gotten a starting class, um, and they were all just right ahead of me. So now I'm next in line.
So you,
So
you imagine yours should be hopefully popping up soon-ish.
exactly.
Uh, but I mean, either way, it seems like you said you've been here for about 2 years and you've been enjoying yourself. It sounds like there's people who look at flight instructing different ways. Some people want to do it for a very long time, and that they're like okay with just kind of like they're not really looking to go to the airlines. They like instructing. They'd rather move up instructing or maybe become a DPE. Um, was instructing something that you've like come to enjoy? Did you always know that instructing was going to be something you had to do as a part of your journey?
I figured it was going to be something I did.
Mhm.
And at first I was a little hesitant, before I really knew what flying was like. I was
Mhm.
hesitant. I was like, it sounds like this is the only way to do it, so I guess I'm going to have to do it. But
Mhm.
as I started to learn the environment and the atmosphere,
Mhm.
met some really cool people
Mhm.
flying with them, like within the instructor student
Yeah.
scenario. So towards the end, when I was actually getting close to obtaining my flight instructor certificate, I was actually looking forward to it
Yeah.
and getting into it. It's loads of fun, and I love flight instructing.
Yeah, I mean, because you could have done. I mean, a lot of people would say, make a pretty strong argument that this is one of the better ways to learn more and build flight hours. Because you could do other things, before going to the airlines, right? Would you say that in hindsight, like you could have imagined them doing anything else to build hours?
The first I think everybody should flight instruct for some extended period of
Hmm.
time to be a professional pilot. I think it
Yeah.
is necessary. The amount that I've learned in all the hours of instruction
Mm,
I've given is unbelievable.
mm,
I learn from what students do. I learn from things that they ask. Mistakes that we both make together. It helps me become a better pilot,
mm,
and then I'm able to pass that on. But I feel like when you're in a environment where you kind of don't have that second person there watching you,
mm.
especially when we're so, like I was saying earlier, we're entry level still.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that second pair of eyes that goes like, hey, why'd you do it like that, or why'd you do it this way, so you can
Mm.
kind of prevent the building of bad habits.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and you're still bouncing things off of each other, whether it's a student or a fellow CFI.
Mm,
So that makes a lot of sense. And then you learn a lot about responsibility there because in this sense, everything's in your hands now, right? You're responsible to make sure this person's safe at least on some level, right? Do you? I wanted to ask you about being a CFI for about 2 years though. Is there anything that you see repetitively, like maybe common mistakes that students make?
I don't know. I think getting one of the biggest things, if I'm talking on very entry,
Hmm.
um, there's and I guess I wouldn't really call it a mistake, but the kind of
Maybe a behavior or something like that?
hesitance,
Mm,
and I'm totally understandable. So they're hesitant to actually fly the airplane, and I've had
mhm,
past students tell me it's like I didn't really realize until after my private pilot certificate that
mhm,
I could actually fly the airplane. They're real hesitant, don't want to control the airplane. So
mhm,
I like to tell students, at the end of the day, we are the ones flying the airplane. You can't let the airplane fly you.
mhm.
So I feel like that's a really big one. So
Yeah,
on some of those first lessons, I really like to enforce that. Throw the plane over real quick.
like, feel it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and show them it's like it's completely safe.
Yeah.
It's safe to do these things. So make sure you're the one flying the plane. You're not letting the plane fly you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good that makes a lot of sense. I've heard people talk about confidence. How can you build like, what do you do to get that light bulb go off on them? Because sometimes it's a lack of confidence, no?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's there's a lot going on in these aircraft, and
Mhm.
I mean, you're aware that you can't really pay attention to everything. It took me a while before I actually could
Mm.
truly understand what I was doing in the airplane. It was kind of just like it was kind of happening. Um,
Mm.
but through building confidence, I think the biggest thing you can do is just the time.
Mhm.
Practice. The more you fly, the easier it's going to get.
Mhm.
Don't be hesitant, or don't think it's not for you just because you're not comfortable the first 10 flight hours or something like that. It takes time to get used to it and put yourself in this more, I guess, comfortable state.
Yeah. I'm sure you've started to see what works for them and what doesn't work for them as an instructor. Um, Maybe for students and or for other instructors. What's something that you're seeing works for students going into check rides? What's maybe even a piece of advice for students going into check rides?
So overstudying, I
Mhm.
feel like is it can be at a certain point, it's going to be where you're kind of hurting yourself. I
Mhm.
remember those nights, and I know those nights before check rides, it's not the easiest to fall asleep.
Yeah.
You're real nervous, and you're thinking, what am I missing? Oh no, I haven't thought about this in a while, and you
Mhm.
just, you just won't let yourself rest. Um, and actually, one of our DPEs, he helped me obtain my flight instructor certificate back, 2.5 years ago,
Mm.
and that was one of the things he told me. It was the day before my check ride, or maybe a couple days before my check ride. He's like, rest. If you don't know it now, you don't know it. Like, there's no
Yeah.
reason to keep yourself up and stress about these things. Just try to take it easy.
Mhm.
I know there's stressful situations, but I think that's really kind of the biggest thing is try to relax as best you can, right? And these
Right.
DPEs kind of have this I don't want to say stigma, but they're intimidating. It's like,
Mhm.
okay,
Yes.
this is going to be the person that's going to be telling me whether or not I'm ready to be a pilot to a specific level.
Yeah.
And that was something I noticed flight instructing. As a student, the DPs were scary.
Yeah.
And even seeing them walk around, it's the DPE. But once I started flight instructing, now they're just people. It was a lot easier for me to recognize them as just they're basically, I mean, they're flight instructors as well.
Yeah, they're someone, performing a function. It's their job to, maybe behave a certain way in the plane, that kind of thing. Uh, would you say that by the time you're getting to your check ride, you only got there maybe because like, for example, do you have to sign off and approve for a student to take a check ride in the first place?
Correct. Correct.
Gotcha. So you could even say that, hey, you wouldn't be taking the check ride
Yeah,
if someone
absolutely.
didn't see a point in it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I've told that to students because I've had students, express this, like, kind of last minute stress, and I tell them it's like, I've seen you do all of these things. I'm confident in your skill to
Mhm.
be able to do this, right? I wouldn't send you in there if I thought you were going to fail, right?
Right.
You're ready for this, so
Yeah.
don't question yourself about it.
Right, you've been a student here every day. Like, to your other point, about, hey, if you don't know it by now, well, then you're not gonna know it by then anyways. It's in a day or two, right? Uh, you've been studying every day. I mean, even if you're in your private, how many weeks in are you usually taking your first check ride at? Maybe 6 weeks or something like that. Up to a
Yeah,
couple
I'd say
months.
probably 6 to 8 weeks, just depending on weather.
Yeah, you're right, and that depends. And we have the EOC, right?
Mm.
So, examining authority. For anyone who doesn't know, examining authority here at Thrustlight allows us to pass students on their ratings on behalf of the FAA's regulations. That's the best way I can put it, I think. But if you don't know it by now, then you wouldn't know it. It's safe to say that you've been doing it for 6 to 8 weeks or so, at least your first check ride. I mean, what's another couple of days before your check ride? That's a splash that you could even try to make. There's no reason to cram. It sounds like I've heard people say that people make more mistakes. Oh, actually, Wally said people make more mistakes when they're tired and not rested. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it all lines up what you're saying is all I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and that's another thing I always tell my students.
Yeah.
I've probably sent somewhere about 40 or so people off to check rides,
Hmm.
and every time the night before, I'm like, okay, don't stay up super late. Get some rest.
Hmm.
Tomorrow morning, wake up, take a shower, give yourself ample time. Make sure
Yeah.
you have everything before you leave your house. Go get yourself some breakfast. Try to You don't want to be feeling rushed these,
Yeah.
the last 2 hours leading up to the check ride, and you're worried that you're forgetting something. So, double check yourself maybe even the night before and make sure you're going to get good rest and a sufficient breakfast for
Yeah.
what's gonna, your evaluation in the morning or whenever it is.
Yeah. It sounds like the rest will get you further than any amount of 2 days of cramming could.
Oh, absolutely,
And that's the
absolutely.
point, I guess. So, well, I mean, I think the last thing I would want to ask you about is, well, I got two more for you. It's gonna be if there's any, because this is kind of a one off. We're gonna just kind of take a sharp turn. Are there any unique experiences you've had so far in aviation? I mean, you've been flying a little while. I don't know if you've taken the opportunity to do any like small trips or solo trips or take any family up. Is there any unique experiences that you've had so far that you like to tell people about?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so actually, it's kind of ties into the DPE
Hmm.
kind of situation.
Yeah.
So there's a DPE, just south of DFW,
Hmm.
and I actually took a couple students out there for a check ride, and I'm just sitting in the FBO waiting, and she's like, "Hey, you want to come tow gliders with me in the Cub?" I'm like, "Absolutely," So that was first time in a tail wheel, first time landing in grass, and we took off without the door on it. So that was a really cool experience, and that was
Cool.
one of those things that kind of helped me realize it's like these DPs again, they're just people.
Yeah.
So it kind of helped take some of that edge off for myself.
Yeah, and to me, I can only imagine that kind of opening your eyes. Like, I mean, aviation is not just a straight line; it's such a big network of
Exactly.
people and things to do.
Yeah,
So,
and that's one thing that she was talking to me about on that flight. She was kind of teaching me a different way of thinking. It's like there's so much more to aviation than what a lot of people think. A lot of people think you um, start flight instructing and you're to the airlines and that's it.
yeah,
But there's different ways you go about it, like exactly finding different jobs like banner towing or towing gliders, whatever it may be, to
yeah,
become a bush pilot. You're flying somebody's little plane, hopping from island to island or
that's
whatever.
cool.
Then flying a Gulf Stream. There's
Mhm.
so many different ways to go about it,
Yeah,
which is really cool. And she was really trying to enforce that. And she's like, hey, you don't have to be an airline pilot.
yeah. Of course, I mean, that's a part of the
Mhm.
goal,
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean,
right?
yeah, that's what I want
I
to
want to do it
do.
still either way. But I like when people tell me that they've done. It's easy just to go to school and then become the CFI, and then the airlines. I say easy; it's a lot of hard work, but it's easy to only do that maybe and never do any of the other things that are out there. And I think some of the earlier guests we had on the show, that was really enlightening when I heard them talk about some of the different things they've done in aviation. And so I guess one of the last things would be, and this is similar to what I asked you earlier, but I mean, I think it's a good way to end either way if there is something that comes up. Any lessons from your journey? If you could, kind of like I said, if you could go back and tell yourself one thing when you first started flying, what would it be? Maybe not when you're instructing, right? But just in general, like, hey, I just submitted an application and it's my first day, or it's my first week, or maybe it's my first month. I mean, what kind of advice would you have liked to have heard, or would you like to give yourself in that situation?
Slow down. I think that's kind of the biggest. Slow down, and as I was saying earlier, what we do is fun,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of people tend to forget that.
Yeah,
It's again just the grind to whether it be get all your ratings and get to the airlines, or get all your hours as a flight instructor. So
yeah,
try to have fun with it. I think
yeah,
that's going to go really long because, as I said, I mean it's cool. What we do is it's unbelievable, and I mean I tell fresh students, it's like this is I love flying. And I'm
yeah,
like, well, I love flying. The view is unbelievable.
yeah.
And I had one student tell me one day, he's like, he goes, man, that's nice to hear that you still enjoy the view. And it's just, man, well, how can you not? Rushing through, I feel like is not the way to do it. What do they say? Like, smell the roses while
Yeah,
while
smell the
you're
roses,
here.
enjoy the journey, kind of thing.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
that makes smell the roses. I like that. I try to remind myself of those kind of things. I go on walks sometimes just to be like, what is outside? I'm not just in my car in my job, or in my apartment. Like, I'm like, let me step outside for a second. So,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
nice to hear that. Well, I appreciate you for joining us and sharing that. I'm hoping that some of our listeners, whether it be on the streaming platforms or on YouTube, also got a little bit of insight out of you wherever they are in their journey or consideration of flying. But if you guys are listening and you are at this point of the episode, I appreciate you sticking with us all the way through it. And I'm hoping you enjoyed it enough to at least maybe hit a like button, subscribe, or if you have questions, actually, we'd love to hear them in the comments. Well, we always send the CFIs or our guests the video afterwards, so you can always welcome to answer some questions in the comments if they put them in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So again, thanks for joining us, Cayman. If you guys are still here, we'll see you on the next week's episode of Pilots Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say. Thank you.